Hello and welcome to another video. In today's video we're going to be having a little look at our Landmaster ride-on and comparing it to the one that we've borrowed. You may recall in a recent video we went on a bit of a road trip to collect a pillar drill and borrow this Landmaster ride-on from some friends of ours. Now the point of doing that was so that we could get this in the workshop next to our Landmaster ride-on and compare the two to help us fix the oddities and modifications on our machine, seeing as we have no form of owner's manual, service manual, anything like that for these machines. And they are very rare. We've only seen a handful of these in the UK. So what we'll be doing today is we'll kind of show some of the differences between the two that we've already noticed, hopefully discover some more things, and talk about what we're going to do with this Landmaster and the difficulty of the jobs that we have to do on it. Now, by the time this video goes out, this other Landmaster will probably be out of here. Our friends are going to come collect this and take it to a local show on their way back, I think. Now, when we first got this tractor and had a look over it, there was quite a few things that we noticed that confused us about it, which was the main reason for trying to get the other one in here to compare. Now, firstly, when we pull over the engine and have the deck and main drive belts in a disengaged position on their levers, which are the clutch pedal on this side and the deck engagement lever, which itself doesn't work as well because it's meant to, this is in the disengaged position, it's meant to go over center to engage, but it just doesn't. It hovers around the center point. So there's clearly something wrong with that, and that clutch does feel like it kind of hits something, there you are, part way down, so that probably needs looking at as well. But the main issue is that with both of them how they are at the moment, if I pull over the engine, and the cameraman will probably have to pull the clutch pedal for us so that we can actually see it, but if I pull over the engine, you can see there that both of the belts still turn. So clearly there's some adjustments wrong there or something else that means that the drive would effectively be permanently engaged on this at the moment, which means you couldn't change gear and you'd be driving along with the deck spinning the whole time, which is not really what we want. Then there's some other things, like how when the front axle pivots, it takes the paint off the grille here, which makes absolutely no sense, or made absolutely no sense until we looked at the other one. Then there's other things like the fact that the deck lift is absolutely horrible. It's really hard to lift it without kind of pushing up on the underside of the deck with your hand, and it only seems to lift the back of the deck, really. It hardly actually lifts the front. Now, if we compare some of those controls to the other Landmaster here, and sorry about the background noise with our heater, you're going to be quite close to it, but the deck engagement here works well. As you can see, that goes fully over center and the spring is effective, that is good. And when it comes to deck lift, it's also very nice, spring assisted on the way up, which is what you want when it comes to lifting a deck, so that's good. And the mechanism is nice and smooth as well. And we've tried the clutch as well, and that seems to work when it comes to the drive. Now, we also noticed that this doesn't scrape the bonnet when the axle pivots, and that leads to our first observation when it comes to differences between these two Landmasters. Now, if we look at the center here of the front axle, you can see there's this kind of hump or lump part on the top of the front axle, and the bolt is closer to one side, which is the side with the lump in it, rather than the other, so you can see there's more material underneath the pivot bolt. Whereas if we go over to our Landmaster here, you can see the lump part is on the bottom and there's more material above it, which means it is then scraping on the bonnet. So we think our front axle is actually mounted upside down, which I'm not fully sure how someone's managed to do that, but it's definitely an interesting observation. And something to confirm that is if we look at the camber of these wheels, you can see these wheels are kind of cambered with the top of the wheel inwards a bit, like that. Whereas if we look at our Landmaster, they're kind of cambered with the tops of the wheels outwards, which I think is probably the wrong way. So that's one thing that we've noticed between the two. Another thing we've noticed is if we look at the engine pulleys, you can see here this is a cast pulley where both the deck and drive belts effectively mount to the same pulley but different parts of it, and the deck pulley part is 4 inches diameter, drive pulley is 2.5 inches. Whereas if we look at our Landmaster, it is not a cast pulley. It's made up of multiple taper lock pulleys there, so clearly this was made up by a previous owner. The deck pulley is 4 1/8 inches, so slightly bigger, and the drive pulley is 3.5 inches, so that's an entire inch bigger diameter. So this will probably drive a lot quicker than it should do. Whether we want to keep it that way or not is another question, seeing as the gearbox probably wasn't designed for that extra speed, but that's something to decide on at a later date. Another thing we noticed as we were just talking is the position of the springs that are mounted to the deck lift mechanism, which there's one on each side, as you can see there, which on our Landmaster mount from the deck linkage and then mount on the chassis further forwards, whereas if we look on the other Landmaster, it's actually a bit harder to see because they mount to the deck linkage, then go backwards. Can't really see with the lighting. It's very difficult to get lighting under these tractors when they are small as it is, but Dad's pretty much pointing to where they are there. And of course the difference between the lifting mechanism is this one works nicely, ours doesn't, so we're starting to wonder whether the springs, how they are on our one, are possibly acting against you when you're trying to operate the deck lift, and that's why it's so difficult. We've now pulled the side panels off of the kind of deck lifting mechanism, and now if I try to lift this and you watch those springs, you can see as I lift it the springs are stretching, which shows that the springs are going against you when you're trying to lift the deck, which is not what we want. So what we're going to try to do now is find the point where those springs should attach, somewhere back here, and we may well have to take the deck off to do that. Now, I'm sure it sounds like we're being very critical of the previous owner of this tractor or whoever rebuilt this, but we're not intentionally trying to do that because obviously they faced the same problem we do, which is that there's pretty much no information about these tractors available, and I highly doubt they had friends with one of the only other Landmasters in the country. So we effectively have access to information they didn't, which is the only reason why we can kind of make these improvements to this tractor. But we will now try to scope out where those springs should be mounted. Time for an update. It is a little while later now, and we've taken the deck off. As you can see, it's much easier to see under here now without the deck on, and we disconnected the spring on this side from where it was mounted and mounted it the other way around so that the back end of it mounts up here on the chassis. Now, it took us ages to work out where that actually mounted at the back end, because when we were looking at the other tractor over here, it's really difficult to see all the way back there what is going on when it comes to the spring, and we didn't want to undo all the bolts to take the deck off on our friend's machine because the bolts were all painted. That would have taken the paint off, and that's not something we want to be doing at all. So we had to kind of feel underneath the tractor, which took quite a while to actually pinpoint the exact location where it was, but we've now moved this spring to that position. The other one is still where it was when we bought the tractor, so that needs moving as well, which is something that we're now about to do, and then we can come back to you in just a second and do a bit of a test of our modified deck lift system. We have the other spring switched over now, and if I move this lever, I have to apply pressure to move it back, which is lowering the deck, and then it springs forward on its own, which is lifting the deck up. So that should work as it should do when the weight of the deck is then mounted on there, pulling it down as well. That should function properly, which is good. Now, in theory, we could put the deck back on now and test that. However, while we have the deck off, we would like to see if we can try to do an easy fix on the deck engagement. Now, the belt for that, as we've shown before, is all the way up here, and at the moment it has an A28 belt on it. We're going to try to put a slightly longer one on, and we have a spare A29 here, which we're going to try to put on, see if that helps us in any way. Now, obviously, this belt's going to have to come off this pulley for that, and not fully sure how we're going to switch the rest of the belt, but we'll have to see in just a minute. It'd be nice to get that problem fixed before putting the deck back on, if possible. So we're going to see how hard it is to get that belt off, and we'll come back to you. So that quick fix that we were hoping for really hasn't happened now. If we look underneath the tractor, we were thinking that we should take the idler pulley off because it is in the way when it comes to getting that belt off, and we started to take apart the deck engagement lever so that we could move that idler out of the way, which is when we realised that the pin that was in the bottom of it, which is the part that moves the idler and kind of connects the lever to the idler bracket here, that wasn't actually a pin, it was part of a bolt, and that it had broken off. So that was just sitting in there and kind of wiggling about, which is how we noticed that it had broken off. And we know that it shouldn't be a bolt because we've checked against the other Landmaster, and it should be a 1/4 inch pin, which we have made up using dimensions from the other tractor, and this is now ready to get welded in there. Now, obviously, for us to weld this in here, we're going to have to take off quite a bit of paint, and I'm sure more will kind of burn off, which is a shame since this was repainted relatively recently. However, since we're on a bit of a time scale with having the other tractor and we want to get this functional as soon as possible, functionality takes priority over the paint job for now. So we will come back to you in just a second, hopefully with this welded in here, and hopefully we'll be then one step closer to taking this belt off and swapping it. Quite a while later now, and we have the pin welded on there. That works quite nicely, and we also switched the larger A29 belt on there, which in the disengaged position you can turn the engine over nicely and the deck doesn't move, which is good. But then when you put it into the engaged position, and we put an adjustable on the deck output and then tried to spin it over, and it did still slip a little bit, so that belt is probably too loose. So what we've done just a second ago was we ordered a new belt that's in between the original size and the size that we've just put on, so that'll be effectively an A28.5, but they don't do half sizes in A belts, I don't think, so we've ordered a 4L305K, so that's kind of the size in between the two. Obviously that won't arrive for a couple of days, so we won't be able to see whether that will work or not until then. Also, we found this spring in one of our parts boxes, because the spring on here, well, the handle doesn't feel especially nice compared to our friend's Landmaster. So when we sat this spring on here, just over both sides, it felt much nicer. It kind of clicks into position a lot better than the current spring. So when we've put the new belt on there and we're sure that that all works, we will switch this onto there as well, because I think that is quite a bit of an improvement. Another thing that we've done since the last clip is we made a few small adjustments when it comes to the drive belts to the gearbox, and now when you put the clutch down and turn the engine over, the belt slips just fine. So the issue that we had before, or that we thought we had before, where the drive belt was always engaged, seems to have almost fixed itself with the original belt on there. So for now we're going to leave that as it is, because we don't want to do something that might make it worse, and we'll just see how that goes, and whether that, when we have the engine running, whether that is loose enough with the clutch down or not. Now, one of the last things we're going to do today is we're going to put the deck back on and probably put the tractor down on all fours, just to make sure that with the changes that we did to the deck lift mechanism, that still functions well when we have this on there and when it's on even ground, because I think that tends to help when it comes to these slots, having them vertical when you're lifting or lowering the deck. So we will do that and come back to you in just a minute. A while later now, and the deck is back on, and if I show you the deck mechanism, that works nice and smoothly as it should do, so we're very happy with that. Now, the reason this took quite a while was because when we first fitted the deck, when we moved the lever backwards and forwards, it was kind of catching around this point and making a horrible twanging sound when we went past the point at which it was catching. Now, we had to take the deck off to have a better look, and it did take us quite a while to identify what the problem was. And the problem was on a couple of pins that go into the chassis towards the back of the deck, and both of those pins had R-clips in, which you can actually see how bent this R-clip is, and the reason for that is because these were the bits that were catching as you were moving the deck linkage, and that was pivoting and everything. I don't need to sneeze, never mind. So when we were moving that about, these were catching and then obviously releasing when it got past the point at which it was catching. So we took these out, and we can understand why someone put R-clips in, because it's very difficult to get to those pins. So we put split pins in instead, which was very difficult seeing as one of the pins was seized, so we had to try and bend it around the pin with it in the position that it was in, which wasn't very helpful. But here we are a little while later, deck back on, and that works nice and smoothly now. Much better than it did before, where it just didn't work at the start of this kind of video, or the work we've been doing on this tractor. Now, we haven't put the side panels back on yet, because obviously we have ordered that deck belt, and the deck will have to come off again to switch that in the near future. So there's no point us putting those back on or taking the tractor off axle stands. Now, this video has actually been over a few days, because a lot of the things we were doing took us quite a while, and when it comes to video, most of the video stuff that we've done is explaining what we've seen or what we have done, rather than showing you stuff as we do it. And that is because with how small this tractor is, it's hard enough to work on it, let alone try and get a camera in there as well. Most gaps are only big enough that you can kind of just feel what's going on, rather than having enough space to look at what you're doing as well. So it would have been pretty much impossible to give you any good footage of the work we were doing on this over the last few days, so apologies about that. Now, one of the only jobs that we need to do on this now, before our friend's tractor goes back to them, is decide what we're going to do about the handlebars and fix those up. which we're not fully sure what we're going to do about those yet, so that's something to think on. But for now, that is it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.